A young millionaire received a call from an unknown number. "Dad, can you come pick me up?" No one knew who the boy was or why he called him Dad. But what the millionaire did next left everyone in shock. Outside, the weather had started to turn cold. Gusts of wind swept down from the north through Everfield Heights, a neighborhood lined with well-kept homes that rarely stayed fully lit. At house number 42, silence blanketed the air. Inside the quiet two-story house, there was no warmth to be found. A soft yellow light spilled across the pale white wall, casting a shadow of Greg Lucas's stepfather sitting on the living room couch, waiting. His eyes hadn't left the door. Both hands gripped the TV remote, even though the screen had been off for quite some time. 20 minutes late. Maggie Lucas's mother sat at the dining table, fingers laced tightly, her eyes occasionally flicking toward the staircase that led to little Mila's room. Dinner had gone cold long ago. 3 plates of rice sat untouched on the table. One chair was empty. Lucas's. The front door swung open. Wind pushed in behind the wet footsteps of the 14-year-old boy. His dark jacket was soaked through. One strap of his backpack had snapped, dragging across the hardwood floor with a soft but echoing scrape. Lucas breathed out lightly, his hand recoiling when he saw Greg rise from his seat. "Where have you been?" Greg asked. His tone was even but heavy like stone. "I was helping a friend. His books, they all fell at the school gate." "What friend?" "Alex. He was. That dirty poor kid again?" Greg cut him off, stepping back as if the filth had reached him through Lucas's words. "You even know what time it is?" Lucas didn't answer. His eyes sought out his mother's, hoping for something, some sign of rescue. But Maggie only bowed her head, her hands still clenched, just like they had been all evening. He'd lost count of how many times this had happened. "Go wash up and eat." Greg's voice had dropped low, but carried threat like a blade. Lucas walked past the table in silence. Just as he reached for his chair, Greg stood, circled around the table, and suddenly yanked the backpack strap hard. "No dinner for you. Kids who don't respect time don't deserve to sit at this table." The sound of the backpack strap tearing split the air. Lucas staggered, and the bag dropped to the floor. A small piece of paper fluttered out of his front shirt pocket, caught by the breeze from the ceiling fan, a worn business card, its corner creased. "Daniel Reed, Westbridge Capital." Greg bent down and picked it up. His eyes darkened the moment he saw the name. "Where the hell did this trash come from?" he hissed, crumpling the paper in his fist. "You still kept this?" Lucas reached for it, but Greg was faster. He threw the card into the fireplace by the wall and struck a lighter. "Nobody needs to know who that man is, and you don't need to remember." Flames crept up the edge of the paper. Lucas stood frozen. His mother Maggie still said nothing. She just stared at Greg, lips pressed tight, like someone who'd just swallowed a sob. "You're dirtying the house, get out." Greg's voice was low and tight. Lucas turned to look at his mother one more time. Little Mila had appeared on the staircase, clutching her teddy bear, her wide eyes round with fear. "Greg, please." Maggie finally spoke, voice trembling. Greg didn't answer. He walked to the door, unlocked it, then turned to Lucas. "Out." Lucas stepped outside. The door slammed shut behind him. A light drizzle fell from the sky, thin but cold. Lucas pulled his coat tighter around him and sat on the porch steps, knees drawn to his chest. He didn't cry, didn't scream or shout. His eyes just stared into the alley beside the house, where the streetlight cast a pale stretch of light. He couldn't remember how many times this had happened, once for forgetting to buy milk, another time for dropping a glass, once just for laughing too loud during Greg's TV show. But never not once had he felt this torn apart. Each drop of rain turned icy as it landed on his forehead. He slipped his hand into his coat pocket empty. The business card had been burned. That piece of paper wasn't just information, it was the only proof that someone had once existed and had left something behind for him. However small it was, He had memorized that number in his head, going over it again and again, not to call it, just to know it was there, in case a day ever came that was too much to bear, so there'd still be a way out. Then Lucas remembered. He had once scribbled the number on the inside cover of his workbook. Just once, just to test if he could remember it. He unzipped his backpack and flipped through the soaked pages, and there it was, the number. No name, just the digits. He didn't know if the man would remember him, didn't know if he would even pick up, didn't know. Lucas dialed. 3 rings. Then a deep male voice answered. "Hello, this is Daniel." Lucas clutched the phone tighter. "Dad? Dad, it's me. Can you come get me?" The phone in Daniel's hand dropped slightly as the call ended. He stood still on the rooftop terrace of the Clarion Hotel's 32nd floor, where the 20th anniversary celebration of the company he had founded, Westbridge Capital, had just taken place. The night breeze swept through his hair, carrying hints of strong liquor and expensive perfume from the floor below. Daniel paid no attention. His mind kept circling around one word: Dad. For the past 15 years, Daniel Reed, a self-made businessman once dubbed by a financial magazine as the Wall Street Fox with the eyes of a loner, had learned to live among numbers and contracts, not among warm voices calling his name. He bent down to pick up his car keys and walked straight toward the elevator. No word to his assistant, no goodbyes in the ballroom. The whole thing took no more than 90 seconds. On the highway heading out of the city, Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The clock read 11:18 p.m. Lights from roadside signs slid past the window like sparks brushing against old memories. How did they get my number? Do they remember me? Do I still remember their face? Daniel blinked. A blurry image surged up from the past, faint but unforgettable. A 4-year-old child sitting on his mother's lap, eyes looking up as the taxi pulled away from the apartment Daniel once shared with Maggie. She didn't look back, not once. Daniel hadn't stopped them. He didn't call, didn't apologize, didn't go after them, because by then, his trust in her was already gone. Across the city, in a second-floor room, the bedroom light was still on. Maggie sat in a chair by the window, clutching a pillow, as if holding on to something that no longer had shape. She couldn't sleep. Every time Greg got angry and kicked Lucas out, Maggie would sit like that, waiting until Greg had fallen asleep, then quietly opening the door to hand her son a blanket or a slice of bread. But this time, the boy hadn't come back. She didn't dare call out, didn't dare go downstairs. The rain was falling harder, louder by the minute. Daniel's grey SUV came to a stop just outside the complex gate. The GPS had led him to the exact address the boy had given. He turned off the engine, stepped out, his shoes sinking slightly into the puddled water on the stone-paved street. The rain kept falling, drumming against Daniel's shoulders, wetting the hair of the boy standing in front of him, thinner than he'd imagined, smaller than he remembered. For a moment, Daniel didn't know if he should say the boy's name, or just stand there. Was he even sure this boy was his? 10 years apart. One unexpected phone call, a single word, Dad, so faint that Daniel still couldn't let himself believe it was real. He'd prepared for everything, board meetings, multi-million-dollar deals, but he hadn't prepared for this, for facing someone who shared his name, someone he'd walked away from before that boy even knew how to read. "Lucas," he called softly, as if afraid he might get the name wrong. The boy looked up. Those eyes, red from the cold, blurred with wetness, met his. And then the boy spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, unsure if it was a question or a statement. "You really came." His voice caught. Not from emotion, but because his throat was raw after hours in the rain. Daniel stepped forward, saying nothing. He took off his coat and draped it over Lucas without thinking. The gesture needed no explanation, no reason. It was just the right moment, the right instinct. "Are you going to leave again?" Lucas asked. Daniel froze. The question didn't sound like a sulk from a child. It was fear, an old, familiar kind that had lived with disappointment too long. He shook his head, slow and steady, like making a promise. "No. I'm here now." Lucas didn't cry, didn't run into his arms. He just sat there, then slowly got up, his torn backpack in hand. Daniel reached out. Lucas hesitated, then placed his hand in his father's, small, icy cold. Daniel gave it a gentle squeeze. As they walked toward the car, a small window cracked open from the house across the street. Mr. Lee, the elderly neighbor, stood in the shadow of his porch, holding a cup of tea, watching silently. Daniel saw him and gave a slight nod. Mr. Lee nodded back. No words were exchanged, but it felt as if a quiet witness had acknowledged the truth of what had just happened. The car engine started and pulled away. On the way back to the city, Daniel adjusted the heat and reclined the back passenger seat. Lucas didn't say a word. He curled up inside a coat far too large for his frame, eyes fixed on the window, where rain streaked through the glow of passing lights. Daniel tried to break the silence. "You hungry? Want to eat something?" Lucas shook his head. "Does your mom know you're gone?" "No, I didn't tell her. Greg was asleep." Daniel didn't say another word about Greg. He didn't ask, "What did he do?" or "Was this the first time?" There was no need. He knew if it were the first time, the boy wouldn't have been shaking like that, wouldn't have called a near stranger him in the middle of the night. Lucas stayed quiet the whole ride. Daniel didn't push. He remembered something an old friend once told him, that sometimes the only thing a child needs is a quiet space, safe enough to breathe. At 1 a.m., the car stopped in front of Daniel's house in West Heights, a wide brick-fronted home lined with red-leafed trees, their fallen leaves covering the walkway. The porch light was still on. Amanda, the housekeeper, had been waiting. "Mr. Daniel?" She stepped out to greet them. "And this is—" Daniel gave a nod. "This is Lucas, my son." Lucas stepped out of the car. His legs were sore, but he straightened his back. He looked at the large doorway, the lights, and the kind face of the older woman smiling at him. He had never seen anything like this before. Amanda didn't ask many questions. She leaned slightly and said gently, "We've prepared a small room for you, and if you're hungry, I can make some toast right now." Lucas looked at Daniel, as if waiting to know if this was real. "You're safe now, Lucas," Daniel said. For the first time, Lucas gave a slight nod. Daniel stood in the hallway, watching his son's small frame go up the stairs, still clutching the coat. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know what the courts, Greg or Maggie would say, didn't know if he even deserved to be called a father. But he knew one thing. When Lucas had asked, "Are you going to turn the car around?" he'd given the only right answer. Lucas stepped into the large house with a feeling he couldn't quite name. The hardwood hallway stretched all the way to the living room, where warm light spilled out from hidden ceiling fixtures. The air smelled faintly of cedar clean, quiet. Too quiet. He stood just inside the door, his wet shoes barely touching the edge of the rug, not daring to step farther in. Daniel turned and said gently, "Go ahead, come in. It's okay." Lucas nodded and stepped forward hesitantly, his shoulders still slightly hunched, as if bracing for something. At Greg's house, a heavy footstep or a strange look could mean trouble. An older woman came out from the kitchen. Her grey hair was neatly pulled back, and she wore a pale blue apron. She smiled, her voice soft as a breath. "So this is—" Daniel stood beside her and gave a quiet nod. "My son, Lucas." Amanda looked at Lucas, her eyes softening like someone who'd been waiting a long time for this moment. "I'm Amanda, your father's housekeeper. It's chilly tonight, so I made something to warm you up a bit. Come, sit in the kitchen." Lucas glanced at Daniel, looking for permission. Daniel gave a small nod, signaling him to go ahead. In the kitchen, the lighting was softer. A plate of buttered toast and a mug of warm milk with a sprinkle of cinnamon waited on the table. Lucas sat down and slowly picked up the mug, not because he was hungry, but because sitting down felt like the most reasonable thing to do when he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Daniel sat across the table, back straight, hands resting on the surface without touching anything. "Are you cold?" he asked. "I'm fine, I'm used to it." "If you need anything, just let Amanda know. This isn't a hotel, but I want you to feel comfortable here." Lucas nodded, still silent. His eyes were fixed on the tabletop. Daniel felt uneasy in his own role. There was too much that needed saying, but he didn't know where to start. Getting locked out like that? Does it happen often? Lucas looked up. A moment's hesitation, then he nodded. "I've lost count. Once it was because I spilled a glass of water, once because I laughed too loud, another time for helping a friend carry their books. Like today." Daniel gently tightened his hand under the table. "What's Greg like? With you?" Lucas shrugged. "He hates me. Doesn't need a reason, doesn't bother hiding it either." "Does your mother?" "No." Lucas looked at Daniel. His gaze was calm in a way that was quietly alarming. "She knows, but there's nothing she can do. Once she begged him to let me sleep in the garage. At least it had a door, but Greg locked even that from the inside." He paused, then added, "Mom cries a lot, but once she's done crying, that's it." Daniel didn't know what to say. Every word from Lucas was like a cut, and the worst part was he couldn't deny it. He'd been gone nearly 10 years. After dinner, Amanda led Lucas upstairs. Daniel followed, his steps slow and heavy. "The room at the end of the hall is yours. I cleaned up the old one. If it's not quite right, we can fix it later." The door opened. A warm yellow light filled the space, a spotless twin bed, a small desk, a window looking out over the backyard. One corner of the room held an empty bookshelf with a round night lamp on top. "Get some sleep. We'll talk more in the morning. I'll be downstairs. If you need anything, just call." Lucas stepped into the room, but before closing the door, he took a close look at the handle. No latch, no lock. A ripple of unease rose in him. Not sharp, but familiar. Greg had walked into his room in the middle of the night, before no knock. No reason. Lucas pulled the desk chair over and wedged it up against the door. He placed his backpack on top of the chair, not to block it for real, just enough to give him peace of mind. Enough to know if someone tried to push in, he'd have a few seconds to prepare. Downstairs, Daniel sat alone in his study. The soft glow of the desk lamp lit his face where weariness and a slow burning discomfort lingered, silent and unsolved. In front of him sat an old computer, still tied to the same email address, from when Westbridge was just a tiny two-room office they'd rented on a month-to-month lease. Daniel quietly reopened the folders he had avoided for nearly a decade. Lucas had once said, in that small, earnest voice of his, "Mom cries a lot. After you left, she cried all the time." A child's words, words no child should ever have to understand. Daniel paused. In his memory, Maggie was never one to break easily. She'd stood up in the middle of an investor meeting defending him when everyone else questioned his ability. She'd held Lucas close, then looked Daniel straight in the eye and said, "I don't need money, I need you to stay when he cries." And yet, she left. Suddenly. No letter, no call, not a single complaint. Just one evening, Daniel came home and the apartment was empty. Daniel felt bewildered and angry not at Maggie but at the silence that had grown between them. Why had she left without a word? How could she leave her son to grow up under the same roof as a man like Greg? She was once the kind of woman who stood up in a room full of investors to defend him, who dared to argue with his parents to keep an unplanned child. So why did she now lower her head and endure someone like Greg without once turning back to ask him for help? Upstairs, Lucas lay on his side under the blanket. His hand still rested close to the strap of his backpack. The dim glow of the nightlight cast a soft haze on the ceiling. No sounds, no footsteps, but he couldn't sleep. He couldn't bring himself to believe he was safe. Couldn't believe this house, that man, and this bed were real. What felt familiar was fear. Peace, on the other hand, was something foreign. A child learns to sleep near the door when he never knows who might come in. A father begins to revisit the past, not to excuse it, but to understand how he once lost everything. Between those two silences, a thread began to tighten. Not strong yet, but it was there, and no one could have imagined just a few days later, something unexpected would strike, pulling them both into a spiral neither of them could escape. The next morning, soft sunlight streamed into the second-floor room, filtering through the pale silk curtains. Lucas opened his eyes, not because of an alarm clock nor the usual yelling from Greg downstairs. He just woke up, and no one had to shake him awake. Birdsong drifted in from the backyard, something he'd never heard in their old neighborhood. He sat up, glancing around instinctively. The study chair was still propped against the door, his backpack untouched. No one had come into his room during the night. No one came in, no one locked the door, no one banged on it. Downstairs, Daniel had been up for a while. He stood in the kitchen, fumbling with the coffee maker, his eyes fixed on a small notepad with a few scribbled lines. Don't serve food too hot. Don't ask too many questions at breakfast. Buy more unsweetened milk. Amanda had left it the night before. Lucas walked down the stairs, barefoot, hair still messy. He saw Daniel struggling with the toaster. Daniel turned around and offered a slightly awkward smile. Figured you might like some toast this morning? Lucas nodded and took a seat. On the table sat a glass of milk, a bowl of cereal, and a few neatly sliced apple pieces, everything arranged with care. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't showy, but it felt unexpectedly warm. Did you sleep okay? Daniel asked. I did. It felt a bit strange, but I felt safe. Well, we've got a list today. New clothes, school supplies, and then a stop at the school to submit your enrollment papers. Lucas paused when he heard the word school, but then he nodded. No questions, no resistance, just a nod. The meal passed quietly. But midway through the second piece of toast, Daniel spoke again. You think maybe you could smile a little? You don't have to, but I have a feeling your smile's probably not too bad. Lucas let out a laugh. Not loud, just a brief flicker but genuine. Daniel saw it and smiled back, for the first time. Later that afternoon, father and son went to the mall. Lucas tried on a few simple hoodies and picked out a pair of sneakers. Daniel didn't push or suggest anything, he just stood at a distance, watching quietly, and paid when the boy gave a nod. They stopped by the pastry shop and shared a slice of apple tart. While they were there, Daniel received a phone call. This is Daniel Reed. Oh. Amanda, what is it? The housekeeper lowered her voice. You should know. Someone called the house. A man. Didn't leave a name, but he asked, is the kid there? Daniel froze. His heart skipped half a beat. Thank you. Don't answer anyone. Just say you don't know who Lucas is. I'll handle it. At that same moment in the old house, Greg knocked a beer glass off the table. God damn it, she's lost her mind. The kid's been gone 2 days and she hasn't called the cops? Maggie sat curled up in the corner of the sofa, clutching her phone like it was something that might save her. I know where he is, but I can't. Where? At that rich bastard's house, isn't he? That guy took her, didn't he? Maggie didn't answer. The tears had started long ago, but Greg didn't care. I'm calling a lawyer. I'll sue him for corrupting a minor, for kidnapping my kid. Lucas is my son. He's the boy I've raised for over 8 years, fed him at my table, gave him a roof over his head. He's my legal responsibility. Greg slammed his hand on the table. That night, Greg called the office of attorney Mark Kingston, the same man who had once helped him dodge a lawsuit. Mark, in a cold, clipped tone, said only one thing. If the boy is a minor and you have proof he was taken, we can file charges first thing tomorrow. The next day, Lucas officially started at St. Brooke High School. It was a modest private school, not overly competitive but structured enough to instill discipline. Daniel had chosen it for a reason. As he put it, this isn't a place where kids chase after grades. Here they learn how to live. The homeroom teacher, Ms. Helen, a black woman with curly hair in her 40s, greeted Lucas with a warm look and a simple question. "Do you prefer sitting by the window or near the board?" Lucas chose the window. In class, there was a blonde boy with glasses named Sammy. He reached out his hand first. "I'm Sammy. I heard you're new. I transferred here last year too, scared the heck out of me." Lucas smiled, for the second time. During recess, in a quiet corner of the schoolyard, Lucas sat eating a sandwich. Sammy joined him. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. Sometimes silence is all it takes to know you're not alone. But back in the principal's office, rumors had already begun spreading among the parent association. "Is it true that boy is Daniel Reed's biological son?" "The billionaire's kid? You've got to be kidding." "But didn't he run away from home? That's a red flag, isn't it?" "I think we ought to look into this before letting our children sit in the same room." Principal Barnes let out a long sigh. He'd seen this kind of thing before, but this time, something in his gut told him, don't just let it slide. 3 days. That's all it took for a fragile piece to be dragged into the courtroom of prejudice, suspicion, and whispered lies. Lucas didn't know yet that this brief, quiet chapter in his life was about to be broken by the very people who once promised to love him. The weather had turned cold. On the large screen in the living room, the morning news was replaying yesterday's interview clip. Greg sat in front of the camera, arms crossed, his face somber. "I didn't think he'd still have the nerve to call himself a father. For the past 8 years, I've been the one taking care of the boy, from meals to hospital visits. And Daniel Reed? Not even a birthday card. What do you think Daniel wants with Lucas now?" "I'm not sure. Maybe it's the media. Or maybe there's something in his past he wants to keep hidden." Daniel didn't finish watching the segment. He picked up the remote, turned off the TV, and sat down, hands clasped together. What rose up inside him wasn't anger, it was shame. Lucas sat not far away. He didn't say anything, but Daniel could tell he'd heard every word. "You don't have to believe everything Greg said," Daniel spoke slowly. Lucas nodded. No emotion, but no resistance either. He simply asked, "He saved me once, when I had a bad fever. Took me to the dentist once too, but after that, the hitting, the yelling, locking me out, that always happened more." Lucas lifted his head and looked at Daniel. His eyes held no resentment, only the calm flipping of an old page. "One time I came home late from school because of traffic. Greg said I was lying. He slapped me so hard I hit my head on the dining table edge. Mum gave me medicine, but no one asked if it hurt." Daniel tightened his hands slightly. "Still," Lucas went on, voice flat and steady, like someone used to being unheard. "When it rained and I did something wrong, he'd make me sit outside on the porch. One time I cried, just because I got a bad grade. He swiped all my books off the table and kicked my chair over. I picked everything up and kept studying. After that, he locked my room and said, 'A kid who doesn't know his place doesn't need a study corner.'" Daniel tightened his hands again. These weren't complaints. They sounded like reports. Cold, precise, emotionless. As if Lucas had learned to see himself as a file one, not needing sympathy, only acknowledgement. Daniel said nothing more. He quietly stood up and walked toward the small office at the end of the hall. On the desk, the laptop was still open, its pale blue light cast across his face, drained and tense from restrained anger. Daniel typed in a phone number. His hand was still trembling. "Vivian? It's me, Daniel Reed. I need to see you. It's urgent. Not tomorrow morning. Now." The voice on the other end sounded surprised. "What's going on? I can't let my son live like this anymore. I want you to reopen the entire divorce file between me and Maggie Lane, and I want to file for full custody of Lucas officially. No temporary guardianship. No, for the time being, anything." He paused for a second, then spoke again, more quietly. "I let him full once. I won't let it happen a second time, under the excuse of pending resolution." 35 minutes later, Vivian arrived at the house. She was Vietnamese-American with long black hair, thin glasses, and movements that were brisk, but carried a quiet empathy. No dramatics, No excess emotion, just a woman who understood the cost of silence in the eyes of the law and who always stood with the children who didn't get to choose. Daniel led her through the small garden in the back. Lucas was sitting on a bench, reading. He looked up when he saw the stranger, his eyes watchful, not afraid but wary, like an animal used to living in a narrow cage. "Lucas, this is Miss Vivian. She's the lawyer I called to help keep you here." Lucas set his book down. He didn't stand, but his voice was clear. "I'm not planning on going anywhere." Vivian smiled. She didn't argue, didn't correct him. "I know, but the law doesn't always listen to kids. It listens to whoever's got the paperwork. So if you're brave enough to tell the truth, the court will have no choice but to hear it." Lucas nodded, then went quiet. Vivian understood immediately. That silence wasn't defiance, it was deliberation. Daniel stood nearby, eyes never leaving the boy. "I need you working tonight, Vivian. Every piece of evidence, witnesses, paperwork. Whatever you ask for, I'll get it. But don't take your time. I don't want a single legal loophole Greg can crawl through to take anything back." Vivian nodded. Her voice was steady. "I'll start with the divorce records. If there's anything that wasn't properly documented, we'll bring it to light this time." Daniel gave her hand a gentle squeeze. What burned inside him now wasn't just anger at Greg, but anger at himself. For once believing that silence was also a form of protection. No, silence is a form of abandonment, and you're not going to do that again. That evening, Lucas borrowed the study room to search for his old textbooks. Daniel was in the kitchen with Amanda, busy preparing the first roast chicken he'd made since his ex-wife left. While rummaging through the cabinets beneath the bookshelf, Lucas found a slightly open drawer. Inside was a stack of old documents and a thin envelope. He hadn't intended to pry, but the careful handwriting on the front made him stop. "To Daniel, if you still want to know the truth." Lucas hesitated. Then he opened it. "I didn't leave you, I never did. But your mother came to see me. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten me. She just placed a check on the table and said, 'If you truly love my son, you won't ruin his future.' I didn't leave because of the money. I left because I was afraid that if I stayed, I'd make you choose between your mother and me. And I didn't have the courage to put you in that position." By the time Lucas finished reading, he didn't know when his hands had clenched so tightly. A sharp ache spread across his chest, not anger, but something colder, something piercing. The door behind him creaked softly. Daniel stood in the doorway, eyes fixed on the letter in his son's hand. "Dad, I didn't mean to—" "It's all right. You have a right to know." Daniel walked in, took the letter and read it. When he reached the last line, his hand fell to his side. He stood in silence for a long time. "I used to think your mother left because she didn't love me anymore. I was angry at her, angry at myself, but I never blamed my own mother." Lucas looked at him. "Grandma really did that?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old folder of bank statements. His fingers moved quickly to a familiar entry. $150,000 wire transfer, October 2014, from his mother's account to a woman named M. Lane. It matched the time Maggie left. It matched the letter. It matched the hollow feeling that had never quite gone away. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to think, maybe my mother wasn't as good as I believed. Some secrets are buried with silence and blind trust, but once unearthed, they don't just change the present, they make you question everything you thought you knew about your own family. The undercurrent had been set in motion, and the storm it had only just begun. Greg's house was pitch dark. Footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor, then stopped at the entrance to the attic. Maggie stood there, her hand still trembling from the argument moments earlier. A red mark lingered on her cheek. Greg's heavy hand had left its print. She didn't cry. She'd learned not to cry in front of him. But when he called Lucas a parasitic ingrate, something inside her broke. He left, and good riddance. A kid like that always ends up betraying his teacher. You're still defending him? You'd better remember, I'm the one who paid for his schooling. Maggie said nothing. She just quietly climbed the stairs, locked the attic door behind her, and stood still for a while in the dark, armed only with a small flashlight. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and musty fabric. Cardboard boxes were stacked haphazardly. Cobwebs clung to the nailed-shut window frames. She knew exactly what she was looking for. She had hidden that box a long time ago. Hidden it from herself. Hidden it from her own memory, because just thinking about it made her chest seize up like someone was squeezing her heart. At last, in the far corner of the attic, under a faded blue tarp, she found it. A brown cardboard box. No label, no name. Thick with dust, but the tape on the lid was still intact. Maggie set it down on the floor and sat cross-legged among sawdust, and her fingers lifted the lid slowly, as if afraid there'd be nothing left inside. But everything was still there. A long ivory envelope, the sender's name, Elaine Reed. She pulled the envelope out. Inside was a check for $150,000. A contract came with it. Transfer of Westbridge shares. No claims post-divorce. A handwritten note in shaky blue ink read, "Accepting this offer confirms you no longer have any ties to Daniel." At the very bottom was a handwritten letter, not long, barely a dozen lines, neat, cold. "This isn't about revenge, but if you truly care about my son, you'll let him go. Not everyone is born for the same kind of life, and love, even when it's beautiful, can't survive when it costs someone their dignity, day after day. Elaine Reed." Maggie set everything down. Her heart pounded. Her ears rang. She couldn't remember the last time she had read these lines. Maybe she never had. No one abandoned anyone. No one lied. They were just severed from each other by a hand that was gentle and merciless. Maggie bent forward. She began to cry. This time, not for Greg, not for Lucas, but for herself, for letting someone else rewrite the story of her life with the pen of power and silence. Tears dropped onto the check still folded just as it had been the day she got it. She had never spent it. It was untouched, unchanged. A soft knock at the door. Maggie startled and turned. The attic door creaked open. Little Mila, her daughter with Greg, stood there, holding a teddy bear, dressed in striped pajamas. Her voice was light as a breeze. "Mummy, are you crying?" Maggie wiped her face quickly. "No, sweetheart. Mummy's just a little tired. Do you miss Lucas?" Maggie froze. Mila came in and sat beside her. So small, but her wide eyes were steady and serious. "I miss him. He used to read stories to me. You said he went away to school, but I heard Daddy Greg say he was a traitor." Maggie pulled her close, held her tight. "You're not wrong, honey. Lucas is a good person. Then why don't you call him?" Maggie couldn't answer. She just stroked her daughter's hair and looked up at the dark attic ceiling. Her voice was hoarse. "Because Mummy is still learning how to be a good person too, Mila, and sometimes grown-ups take longer to learn than kids do." In the upstairs study, the desk lamp cast a tired glow across Daniel's face. In front of him lay the letter Lucas had quietly left on the desk that afternoon. The ink was smudged, the handwriting clumsy but honest. "I think Mom once meant to send this to you, but she never did." Beside it sat the file Vivian had just sent over, documents prepared for the upcoming preliminary hearing. Daniel turned the pages, but his mind couldn't hold on to a single line. The bank statement was still there with a red ink note scrawled in the margin. "Questionable transfer, $150,000 from Elaine M. Reed, May of that year." Daniel's fingers tightened slightly. The more he read, the more the pieces locked into place like puzzle fragments that refused to be ignored. That month. That was when Maggie left, without a word. No confirmation tied to the funds. No internal company memo. No formal agreement after the divorce, just a single personal transfer. And after that, vanishing. The only woman who had ever made Daniel walk away from a multi-million-dollar deal just to make it back to the hospital in time for his son's birth. Daniel stood up. The next morning, a ranch in the highlands of Wyoming, Elaine's estate sat quiet, as if no storm had ever touched it. Daniel arrived unannounced. No bodyguards, no driver, just a man standing before the wrought iron gate of the house he'd grown up in and had been quietly shut out of before he even realized. Elaine opened the front door, graceful as ever, her silver hair neat, morning coffee still steaming in her hand. She wasn't surprised to see Daniel. "I knew you'd come," she said, as if he were a guest arriving right on time. Daniel didn't go inside. He simply set the envelope down on the wooden table out on the porch. The letter Maggie never sent, a bank statement, a photocopy of the post-divorce share transfer agreement, the one Daniel never signed. "You didn't have to say anything, Mom. I know the money left your account, and right after that, Maggie walked out of my life." "I didn't force her," Elaine said. "No, but you arranged it so she didn't have a choice." She didn't argue, didn't admit it, didn't deny it, just sat there silent. Daniel looked straight at her no longer as a wounded son, but as a man learning not to let anyone else rewrite his past. "My son is trying to believe in a father. I won't let another quiet decision tear him away from that." She gave no answer, just took a sip of her now cold coffee. Daniel stood up, said nothing in parting. As he stepped off the porch, he called his sister. "Anna, you were right. Mom's always controlled the story. But from now on..." A pause. "From now on, no one gets to rewrite this family's story, not even her." 3 weeks after Lucas moved in with Daniel, the official petition for temporary guardianship was filed with the state court. It wasn't that Daniel had wanted to avoid legal matters, but after the interviews Greg had deliberately arranged, the follow-up calls from Child Protective Services, and the way the police looked at Lucas as if he'd been abducted, Daniel knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. Vivian Tran, the attorney, prepared the paperwork. Inside were a signed statement from Amanda describing Lucas's condition when he first arrived, an old photo of bruises on Lucas's wrist from the previous year, taken by Mr. Lee, who had seen them by chance, a detailed log of the times Lucas had been locked outside, corroborated by footage from a neighbor's security camera, and for the first time, a sworn statement from Sylvia Morton, the former housekeeper who had lived with Greg and Maggie during the first 5 years of Lucas's life there. Daniel hadn't wanted to dig up the past just to smear Greg, but he needed the law to formally recognize what Lucas truly deserved: a safe home and love that meant something. Greg, when he received the court notice, went ballistic. "He's suing me, after I raised that kid for 8 years. Mark Kingston, his attorney, didn't flinch. He merely pushed the file aside. Good, we'll file a countersuit. Claim unlawful retention of a minor." Greg let out a cold laugh. "If the court wants war, I'll give them one." And that's why this morning in courtroom 4B, Lucas sat between two men. One, a shadow from his memories, now a place to call home. The other, once called Dad, now the opposing plaintiff. The courtroom on the second floor of the Kingswell County Courthouse was bright with fluorescent light. Grey walls, dark wooden benches, no place for illusions, only the law, the truth, and sworn testimony remained. To the left, Daniel sat in a charcoal grey suit, next to attorney Vivian Tran, and Lucas dressed in a crisp white shirt, hair neatly combed. The boy looked straight ahead, his eyes alert, but his hands clutched tightly at the hem of his shirt. Across from them, Greg sat, leaning slightly forward, his face attempting to stay composed. Beside him was attorney Mark Kingston, holding a thick case file, his expression as unreadable as ever, just like every time he went into court. Judge Rebecca Harlan, a woman in her early 50s, entered the room and tapped her gavel lightly 3 times. This preliminary hearing on the custody of minor Lucas Reed is now in session. The petitioner may begin. Attorney Mark stood first. "Your Honor, Mr. Greg Walters has been the primary caregiver for Lucas since the boy was 4 years old." Though not his biological father, Mr. Walters has acted in the role of legal guardian, providing consistent care and a stable home environment. He raised his hand, signaling the technician. A large screen lit up. A few video clips played Lucas wandering outside the school gate. An argument on the basketball court. A recent report card showing several weak subjects. These behaviors indicate emotional instability and susceptibility to negative influences. His abrupt decision to leave the home and live with his biological father, who has been absent for nearly a decade, poses a serious threat to his developmental well-being. Greg nodded slightly, trying to appear in agreement, but his eyes kept darting toward Lucas, as if afraid the boy might react. Vivian rose. "We'd like to call our witness, Mr. Lee, a longtime neighbor of Mr. Walters." Mr. Lee slowly made his way to the stand, leaning on a cane. His voice was low but firm. "I'm not the kind of man who meddles in other folks' affairs, but that night I saw the boy locked out in the yard. The wind was strong, the rain was cold, and he didn't cry, just sat there, hugging his backpack like it was the only family he had. I even took a picture. Thought about reporting it, but I got scared of getting mixed up in someone else's business." The courtroom fell silent as Mr. Lee displayed the photo. Vivian continued, "Next, Mrs. Amanda Wilson, housekeeper for Mr. Daniel Reed." Amanda stepped forward, her face resolute. Lucas arrived at Mr. Daniel's house shivering from the cold. On his first day, he ate cereal and toast, like he hadn't had a proper meal in ages. I could tell that hunger wasn't just in his stomach. Vivian paused for a moment, then said, "And our final witness, Mrs. Sylvia Morton." It was Amanda's reminder that led Daniel to go back through the old payroll records Maggie had once kept. That's when he found Sylvia's name crossed out in red with a note that read, "Contract terminated. No reason given." He contacted a friend on the neighborhood council, traced the address where Mrs. Sylvia had moved, and sent her a personal invitation. This time, she showed up thin, slightly trembling, but with eyes full of determination. "I used to take care of that boy when he was little. Greg wasn't all bad, but when he got angry, he'd hit. There was a time he made me lock the door as punishment for Lucas. I did it, but I couldn't sleep that night. I didn't think it was right, I was just scared. Then when I spoke up, I got fired." Maggie knew, but she said nothing. The judge took notes. Greg's face was growing pale. Vivian turned to Lucas. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to." Lucas shook his head and stood up. He looked straight at the judge. "I'm not a bad kid. I just wanted to be loved." His voice was steady. "In Greg's house, I was a shadow, a mistake. I didn't want much, just to be asked, 'How was your day?' without being afraid of getting slapped." He turned to Daniel. "Dad's not perfect, but he listens. For the first time in my life, I feel like I matter." Maggie sat in the back of the room, tears streaming down her face. No one touched her. No one said a word. Because some tears are the answer to 10 years of silence. Judge Harlan struck her gavel. "Court is adjourned. We'll reconvene next week." She looked around the room, her gaze settling on Lucas, who was still trembling but didn't back down. This boy doesn't need saving. He just needs a chance to live in truth. When a child stands up and speaks the truth, it's no longer just a courtroom. It's the beginning of a new kind of freedom. That night, Lucas went to bed early after the trial. He only ate half a bowl of soup, then asked to be excused and went upstairs. Daniel said nothing, and Amanda stayed silent too. Sometimes, letting a child have some peace after a long day is the only way to keep love from becoming a burden. The bedroom door closed softly. Daniel sat alone in the kitchen, slowly turning the handle of his now cold cup of tea. Lucas's words echoed in his mind, like an arrow lodged deep in his heart. Dad's not perfect, but Dad listens. He wondered, did he really deserve that? Because for all those years he had never truly been there to listen to anything. The next morning, right at 10 o'clock, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number, but Daniel already knew it was Maggie. "Daniel, can I see you? Just once. At the old cafe, near Grace Church." Daniel looked out the glass door. The sun was shining, but sunshine doesn't always warm a wound. I'll come. Just once. The small cafe was as peaceful as it had been back then. Daniel arrived early and sat in the same seat at the same table. Maggie came right on time, looking simple and unadorned. A cream-colored sweater, her hair neatly tied back. No makeup, just herself. Not the ex-wife. Not the put-together mother. "Thank you for coming." Daniel didn't respond, just set down his plain white coffee cup. Maggie carefully pulled out a thin envelope. "These are the originals, the letter from your mother, the cashier's check, the contract. I kept them as proof to myself I never used that money." Daniel turned each page in silence. The numbers, the signatures, the terms, they were all real. But the memory of Maggie leaving without a word, carrying Lucas in her arms, still lingered. A scar that had lasted 10 years. I accepted it, but I never spent a dime. I only took the money to prove it was your mother who forced me to go. I didn't want my son growing up on someone else's money. I still have a little self-respect left. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then asked very slowly, "Why did you choose to stay with someone like Greg? You knew better than anyone what our son had to endure. You knew what kind of man Greg is, and yet you stayed, and still, you left our son there with him." Maggie clenched her hands tightly, as if she might fall apart if she didn't hold herself together. "Because you don't know Greg when he's angry. He kept all my papers. He threatened to sue for custody of Mila if I left. He already had files, had a lawyer. I had nowhere else to go. I had no rights at all. And after I walked away from you, I thought, I didn't deserve to ask for anything anymore. But why didn't you call me? Because I thought you hated me, thought you'd erased me from your life. And at times, I hated myself too." Daniel looked at the woman before him, once strong, once vulnerable, and now something between brave and worn out. "Maggie." She looked up. She began to cry, no sound, just a soft trembling in her shoulders. Daniel stood, walked over to her without waiting for permission. He wrapped his arms around her, as if he'd been saving that space for 10 years just to do this. Maggie leaned her head gently against his shoulder and whispered, "I'm not ready to come back. I'm not even sure I have it in me to call it love anymore. But if you'll let me be near our son, I'll do everything I can to make up for the silence I once allowed." Daniel nodded. No pressure, no demands. "Then stay close, start again. From the very beginning." They stood like that, not calling each other anything, but both knew some forgivenesses aren't an ending, they're a place to begin. That afternoon, when he got home, Daniel saw an envelope placed on his desk. The sender's name was Daniel Ramsey, investigative journalist. Inside was the draft of an article, "The Man Robbed of Fatherhood, the Reed Case Reopened After 10 Years." It included a photo of Mrs. Reed, records of money transfers, handwritten letters, testimony from the former housekeeper, and even the letter Lucas had found in the previous chapter. Daniel read every line, then placed the draft down, folded it, and carefully put it away in a drawer. Afterward, he called Daniel Ramsey. "Thank you," he said, "but I'm not publishing this. You don't want the whole country to know the truth. I just want one person to believe me." And that boy sat in court and called me Dad. That evening, Lucas was in the living room, feet propped up on a chair, reading. Daniel sat farther away, not disturbing him. Lucas looked up. "Mom came, didn't she?" Daniel looked a bit surprised. He nodded. "I don't hate her. I just don't know what to say. She always lowers her head like I'm her shame." Daniel gave a quiet nod. Then he sat beside his son, saying nothing. Just sat. It was the first time the two of them didn't need words to understand each other. Not everyone who causes pain deserves to be hated forever. Not every crack needs to be patched right away. Some cracks, if enough light finds its way through, can become the very place where hope begins to grow again. Riverside Park was bathed in gentle sunlight that weekend. Golden leaves blanketed the grass, and children's laughter rose in bursts like kites sailing into the clear blue sky. Daniel sat on a checkered blanket, hands opening a sandwich container, eyes following a group of kids not far off. Lucas, in a navy blue jacket, was playing soccer with Sammy. Little Alex, the once poor kid Greg used to look down on, and Nina, the frizzy-haired girl who always carried around a box of crayons. Just over a week earlier, the trial had officially come to a close. Greg had withdrawn his countersuit after being confronted with an unshakable string of evidence. Sylvia Morton, the former housekeeper, not only testified in detail about the abuse Greg had inflicted on Lucas, but also turned in a recording. Greg's voice, harsh and domineering, forcing Lucas to kneel just for spilling water on the floor. Judge Rebecca Harlan delivered the final ruling in a voice that was stern yet warm. Lucas Reed will be placed under the permanent legal guardianship of Mr. Daniel Reed, his biological father. This boy deserves to live in a place where his very existence doesn't require him to bow his head. Maggie didn't come that day, but Lucas stood tall, nodding when his name was called. No more tears, no more fear. After the trial, Elaine Daniels' mother took the initiative to seek Maggie out. The two women met in the courthouse hallway, where the afternoon sun streamed through the high windows. No pleasantries, no justifications. Elaine spoke first, her voice low and hoarse. I was wrong. I let my pride turn me into someone cruel. I treated you like an enemy, when it was my son who needed a home, and you were the one who once tried to give him one. Maggie stood still. She didn't flinch, didn't push back. She just gave a small nod. Lucas happened to be walking by then and overheard. He didn't say anything, but for the first time his eyes met his grandmother's, not with anger, just honestly. Daniel watched his son, his hand unconsciously loosening at his side. A little later, when the kids had taken a break under the shade of a tree, a familiar voice called from behind, "Mr. Reed?" Daniel turned around. It was Ms. Helen, Lucas's homeroom teacher, holding a paper coffee cup and wearing a gentle smile. "Sorry if I'm interrupting. I happened to be nearby. Lucas mentioned the family was having a picnic today." Family. Daniel repeated the word softly, as if testing whether he'd heard it right. "I just wanted to pass along a quick note." Lucas wrote a short piece in class, a story. It's called The Lost Father. Daniel looked surprised. Helen pulled a printout from a beige folder. "It's not the best piece I've read this year, but it's the most honest." The story was just over a page long. But when he got to the last part, Daniel stopped cold. The lost father didn't know the way back, but the boy stayed right there. No tears, no anger, because he believed if his father really loved him, then he'd find his way. Daniel rested his hand on the final line. A quiet warmth spread into his palm. That afternoon, after saying goodbye to his friends, Lucas helped Daniel roll up the carpet and fold the boxes. He didn't say much, but when they got home, instead of going straight into his room and closing the door like he usually did at night, Lucas left the door open. Around 9 p.m., while Daniel was reading in his study, there was a soft knock. Lucas stood in the doorway, wearing his pajamas. In his hands was the printed short story. "Dad?" Daniel looked up. Lucas took a breath. "Could you read it to me?" Daniel didn't ask anything. He simply stood, followed his son back to the room, and sat down beside the bed. Lucas curled up under the blanket, his eyes wide open. Daniel turned to the first page. His voice was steady, a little hoarse. "Once upon a time there was a father who got lost." With each word spoken, each line slowly began to heal. Not with a pen, but with presence. At the final line, Daniel paused. Lucas whispered, "That one. I wrote for you." Daniel gently squeezed the small hand beneath the blanket, not because he needed to say anything, just that. There was nothing left that needed to be said. Late summer, the sun no longer blazed. It lingered gently, leaving behind a thin layer of pale gold on the sidewalk. Lucas stood at the gate of his new school, dressed neatly in his uniform, backpack on his shoulders. He no longer hunched or bowed his head like he had at the start of the year. His face remained quiet, expressionless even, but something in his eyes had changed. Across the street, Daniel sat in his car, window rolled down. In his hand was a water bottle and the book Lucas had left behind. No words were spoken, but their eyes met. No signal needed. Lucas crossed the street. On a park bench nearby, Maggie was already sitting. She was no longer the shadowed figure hiding behind a window pane. Today she wore a white blouse, her hair loose, her hands resting calmly on her lap, empty. No purse, no phone to shield her. Lucas sat down beside her, not too close, not too far, just enough for every word to be heard without ever touching. Maggie spoke first. "I have something, a box I've kept since you were 4. She opened the lid and held it out to Lucas. Inside was an old photograph, Daniel holding Lucas in a park, both of them beaming. The photo was scratched and worn, but the smile remained untouched. Beneath it was a folded letter, the paper yellowed with time. Nothing flowery, just a few lines that read, "If you feel like I didn't protect you, you're right, but I never stopped thinking about you. I just went about it the wrong way." Lucas read for a long while, then he folded the letter, placed it back inside the box, and closed the lid. "I don't hate you anymore, but I'm not ready to call you Mom again." Maggie nodded. Her face didn't force a smile. She just let out a quiet breath, like someone who had finally heard the verdict they'd been waiting for and accepted it. Daniel didn't step forward. He stood at a distance, leaning against the car. When he saw Lucas get up from the bench, he raised a hand in greeting. Lucas ran over, opened the door, and climbed into the passenger seat. He was still holding the box in his hands. Daniel asked, "You okay?" Lucas nodded. "It's not like in the movies, Dad. No hugs, no dramatic music." Daniel gave a soft laugh. "Then maybe it's real." On the way home, the wind came through the open window. They stopped at the old bakery, the place where Lucas had picked out his first sandwich from his dad's hand. The front window still had that tiny crack in the corner, just like back then. Miss Helen passed by and waved from across the street. Sammy and Nina rode their bikes from the opposite direction and raised their hands in greeting. Alex, riding on the back of a bike, shouted, "Lucas, don't forget the ball on Monday." That night, in a quiet room, Lucas left his bedroom door open. His desk lamp was on. The breeze through the window made the curtains sway gently. On the desk lay a thick storybook, nearly 100 pages long, with a watercolor cover drawn by hand. Lucas stuck a small label on the front. The son of an imperfect father, but one who always came back. He stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then he turned off the light, but didn't close the door. Because now, he wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Not everyone who walks away from their past needs to scream or fight or wait for justice from someone else. A child who's grown strong enough to write their own story. That's the clearest proof there is that pain, when it's heard and patiently healed, becomes light. And that imperfect father, in the end, found himself right where he should have been all along, beside his child. Lucas's story isn't just a journey to find his father. It's the journey of a child searching for safety, trust, and a sense of self-worth. It reminds us that sometimes what a child needs most isn't someone perfect, but someone who won't walk away when they're needed the most. What do you think about Maggie's decision? If you were Daniel, would you have the forgiveness it takes to open your heart again? And if you had been Lucas, would you have stayed silent or spoken up? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, not just because I'm the storyteller, but because I truly see you, those of you watching, as a vital part of this journey. Are you doing okay? If today's been a hard day, I hope this video gives you a quiet place to sit for a moment, maybe even breathe a little easier. And if you're needing someone to listen, just leave a dot or a message. I'm here.